Okay, everyone. So my article this week is called "Ears, Heads, and Eyes When Singers Synchronize," and it is looking at previous research in the keyboard and instrumental research that looks at synchronization between performers and applies this to choral singing. So they were trying to answer two main questions: what cues, auditory and visual, or if cues, aid in the synchronicity of two singers, and if during a solo performance, any individual differences could successfully predict whether a paired performance will be high or low in synchronization. So to answer this, they took 32 vocalists that had at least 6 years of experience singing in vocal ensembles and used that as the study group. They actually had a lot more experience than 6 years. As it turns out, their median or their average was about 12.3 years of experience. They were also then randomly paired into 16 groups of two. Another just thing they had to do for this experiment is be familiar with Frere Jacques, as that was the musical stimuli. So the singers were monitored using cardioid directional head-mounted microphones to capture their sound, and also wore a headband with reflective markers used for motion capture to track their movements in space, specifically their head movement. So any small movement that they made, the researchers knew. So the singers first sang solo trials, where one person was only in the room at a time, the other person was out and could not hear them. They then came in the room as a pair and were assigned either a leader or a follower role for the first half of the experiment. The leader was just the person to lead, which came in handy with the canon trials, and the follower was basically supposed to follow the leader. They then sang in unison and canon trials, both while facing inwards and outwards from each other. So in the unison trials, they sang together. There was no space that was supposed to occur. And then in the canon trials, the leader would start, and 8 beats later, the follower would start. So this was testing whether or not any auditory cues would help or hurt the synchronicity of the singers. And then facing inwards, they faced inwards at a 90 degrees and faced outwards at a 90 degrees. At a 90-degree angle from each other during those conditions, which looked at whether or not the presence of visual cues aided in the synchronicity of the singers. Once they were completed all of these trials in their original leader and follower roles, the roles were then switched. So what did they find? Well, they first found that there wasn't a lot of asynchrony to begin with these singers, and they noted that this is perhaps because of how well trained that these singers are, that even if they weren't looking at each other and singing in a round, that they still stayed together pretty well. But that when there was asynchrony, it was reliably smaller when singers were facing inwards, if only slightly. So they did find that the presence of visual cues did help with synchronicity. There was also no significant changes in asynchrony during round trials, but found that the increased difficulty of the task resulted in slower tempos and more variability in the movement of both participants. So basically, there weren't. They still lined up pretty well, but it was a more difficult task. So there were other things associated with that, and perhaps the movement was to help keep time. One other thing that's apparently not on the slide is that they did not find that any individual differences could reliably predict what was going to happen during the paired trials. So what implications might this have? Well, this paired with behavioral evidence supports the use of spatial positions used by choral groups to optimize both auditory and visual feedback. So this basically is, grouping all the alto twos together that are all going to sing the same line. They all are together in the same area so they can hear each other. And then visual feedback, making sure you can see the conductor. The ability to synchronize visual cues does aid in the synchronization of auditory onsets, therefore prioritizing watching in an ensemble, even through peripheral vision, is crucial. And body movements may be intended to aid in vocal synchronization, especially during difficult tasks. So, head bobbing and tapping on your leg, etc., can all help aid in synchronous onsets. And that is my time. How do I stop this? There we go.